It's January 1st, 1991. Moscow. Snow falls over Red Square. The hammer and sickle still hangs from the Kremlin, but the vaults beneath it are empty. Not empty of missiles. Empty of dollars. We've been told that the Soviet Union collapsed because communism failed, because Reagan outspent them, because freedom won. That's the fairy tale. Here's the truth. The USSR didn't lose World War III. It went bankrupt. The empire that survived Hitler, that launched cosmonauts into space, that built 50,000 tanks, died not from invasion, but from insolvency. The generals still had their medals. The silos still held their warheads, but the ledger showed zero. And in geopolitics, the ledger is God. Now imagine this. It's 2 a.m, London time. 9 p.m. in Washington. Dawn breaking over Moscow. Encrypted channels light up across every military network on Earth. The message is simple. War. World War III has begun. But here's what they won't tell you in the first 72 hours. The missiles, the tanks, the ships, they don't matter. What matters is who can pay for them. Because modern war isn't fought with courage. It's fought with credit lines. And the first countries to get hit won't be the ones with the biggest armies. They'll be the ones with the weakest balance sheets. Let's rewind. The year is 2025. The global economy is a house of cards built on $35 trillion of American debt. European banks leveraged 20-1 and Chinese real estate bubbles held together with duct tape and propaganda. The stock markets are at all-time highs. The weapons manufacturers are posting record profits. Defense budgets are swelling like tumors. Everything looks stable. Everything looks strong. But beneath the surface, the system is rotting. Because every empire, every war machine, every superpower runs on the same fuel. Cash flow. And when the cash stops, the guns stop. History teaches this lesson over and over, but we refuse to learn it. Germany didn't lose World War I at the Somme. It lost it when the gold ran out in 1918. The British Empire didn't fall because of independence movements. It fell because it owed America so much money it had to sell its sovereignty piece by piece. Rome didn't collapse from barbarian invasions. It collapsed because debasing the currency destroyed the economy and soldiers stopped getting paid. Sovereignty is solvency. Always has been. Always will be. Now picture the world on the brink. NATO and Russia staring at each other across the Polish border. America and China circling each other in the South China Sea. Everyone talks about nuclear arsenals, cyber weapons, hypersonic missiles. But nobody talks about the debt. The United States owes $35 trillion. Its defense budget is $800 billion a year, but a third of that is borrowed money. Russia's economy is the size of Texas. Its war chest ran dry in Ukraine, forcing it to beg Iran and North Korea for ammunition. China holds $3 trillion in foreign reserves, but half of that is locked in U.S. Treasury bonds. If war breaks out, those bonds become worthless overnight. Think about the absurdity of that. China finances America's military, and America's military is designed to contain China. It's a suicide pact written in treasury bills. Europe is even worse. Germany's army is underfunded to the point of comedy. France can barely afford to maintain its nuclear submarines. The UK's Royal Navy has more admirals than ships, and all of them depend on American credit, American logistics, American fuel. Cut that supply line and NATO becomes a book club with tanks. So when the first strike comes, it won't be aimed at Berlin or Beijing. It won't target civilians in New York or Moscow. It'll target something far more valuable, the financial system, because in 2026, war isn't about capturing territory. It's about collapsing the enemy's ability to pay for the fight. The first volley won't be missiles. It'll be a cyber attack on SWIFT, the global banking network that processes trillions of dollars daily. Within seconds, banks can't communicate. Currencies freeze. Credit cards stop working. Pension funds vanish into digital smoke. In London, the stock exchange crashes before breakfast. In New York, trading halts indefinitely. In Tokyo, panic selling wipes out 30% of the Nikkei in under an hour. And this isn't science fiction. Russia was cut off from SWIFT in 2022 as punishment for Ukraine. They survived barely by pivoting to barter and yuan-based trade. But that was a regional conflict. In a global war, there's no backup system. There's just chaos. Within 6 hours, the reality sets in. ATMs are empty. Gas stations close because the payment systems are down. Grocery stores can't process transactions. Pharmacies can't verify insurance. And the government, the entity that's supposed to provide order, is paralyzed because its own payroll system runs on the same network. Now the military stockpiles kick in. The U.S. has massive reserves of fuel, ammunition, and food stored in bunkers across the Midwest and the Pacific. Russia has its strategic grain reserves and oil stockpiles in Siberia. China has its rare earth monopolies and manufacturing dominance. But here's the problem. Reserves don't last. The Pentagon's war plan assumes 30 days of high-intensity conflict before resupply becomes critical. After that, you need functioning supply chains, which means functioning ports, railways, and most importantly, functioning credit. Because even your allies won't ship you oil, steel, or semiconductors unless they believe you can pay them back. And if your currency is collapsing, if your bonds are toxic, if your treasury is insolvent, nobody's taking the deal. Let's talk about Taiwan, the crown jewel, the flashpoint, the island that makes 90% of the world's advanced microchips. If China invades, the global economy doesn't just slow down. It stops. Every smartphone, every car, every weapons system built after 2020 depends on chips from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Lose Taiwan and Apple shuts down. Tesla shuts down. Lockheed Martin shuts down. The U.S. military has war-gamed this scenario a dozen times, and every single simulation ends the same way. Economic collapse within 90 days. Not because of casualties, because of supply chain failure. The chips stop flowing, and the modern world grinds to a halt. But here's the twist. China doesn't want to invade Taiwan. It wants to blockade it. A blockade is cheaper, legally ambiguous, and economically devastating. Cut off the island's ports, and within weeks, TSMC stops production. The global chip shortage of 2021 caused a $2 trillion hit to GDP. A Taiwan blockade would quintuple that. And while America scrambles to rebuild its domestic chip industry, a process that takes 5 to 10 years, China consolidates control. It doesn't fire a shot. It just cuts the wire. Meanwhile, Europe is hemorrhaging. The continent's energy grid is almost entirely dependent on natural gas, and half of that came from Russia before the Ukraine war. The transition to renewables is decades away. Liquefied natural gas from the U.S. and Qatar helped fill the gap, but LNG infrastructure is fragile. A few well-placed strikes on terminals in Rotterdam, Barcelona, or Hamburg, and the lights go out. Germany's industrial base, the engine of the EU economy, runs on cheap energy. Without it, the factories close. BASF, Volkswagen, Siemens, they all shut down production. Unemployment spikes. Tax revenue craters. And suddenly the Eurozone, which never fully recovered from the 2008 crisis or the Greek debt meltdown, is insolvent. The European Central Bank tries to print its way out, but the euro collapses against the dollar. Inflation hits 20%, then 30%, then 50%. Pensioners riot in France. Germany contemplates leaving the EU. Italy defaults on its bonds for the third time in a century. And all of this happens without a single Russian soldier crossing the Polish border. Back to the nukes. Everyone obsesses over the nuclear arsenals, and for good reason. The U.S. has 5,000 warheads. Russia has 6,000. China is catching up fast. But here's the dirty secret. Nuclear weapons are useless in World War III, not because they're not destructive. They are. They're the most destructive force ever created, but because using them guarantees mutual annihilation, and dead empires can't collect debt. Think about the logic. If Washington nukes Moscow, Russia nukes Washington. Both capitals are ash. Both governments are decapitated. Both economies are shattered. Who wins? Nobody. The bondholders lose. The shareholders lose. The banks lose. And the real power in the modern world isn't held by presidents or generals. It's held by the people who own the debt. BlackRock, Vanguard, the Chinese Central Bank, Saudi sovereign wealth funds. They're the ones who finance militaries, and they don't profit from Armageddon. They profit from leverage. So the nuclear option remains theoretical, a threat with no follow-through, while the real war is fought in bond markets, currency exchanges, and commodity futures. Let's get specific. It's hour 12 of World War III. The U.S. Treasury tries to auction 10-year bonds to raise emergency cash for the war effort. Normally, there's strong demand. Pension funds, foreign governments, insurance companies, they all buy. But not today. The auction fails. For the first time in American history, there aren't enough buyers. Why? Because if you're Japan or Germany or Saudi Arabia, why would you lend money to a government that might not exist in 6 months? The interest rates spike. The U.S. offers 8% yields, then 12, then 15. Still no takers. And without buyers, the Treasury can't raise cash. Without cash, the Pentagon can't pay defense contractors. Without contractors, the weapons stop being built. The F-35s sit half-assembled in Fort Worth. The Virginia-class submarines stay in dry dock. The soldiers still get their paychecks for now, but the supply chain behind them disintegrates. This is the smoking gun, not a treaty, not a battlefield, a failed bond auction. By hour 18, the social consequences begin. In Moscow, bread lines form outside grocery stores. The ruble has lost 60% of its value in a single day. Pensioners whose savings are in rubles are wiped out. In Washington, the government imposes capital controls. You can't transfer money overseas. You can't withdraw more than $200 a day. The stock market remains closed indefinitely. Protests erupt in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, not because of war casualties, because people can't access their money. In Beijing, the Communist Party locks down the internet entirely. No social media, no foreign news, no financial data. The yuan is in free fall, but the population doesn't know it yet. The party fears revolution more than war. And in London, Paris, and Berlin, martial law is declared. Curfews at sunset. Military checkpoints on highways. Rationing of fuel and food. Europe, which spent 70 years congratulating itself on being post-war, is suddenly pre-medieval. Now the dominoes fall faster. India, which stayed neutral, sees the rupee collapse as foreign investment evaporates. Pakistan, already on the brink, defaults on its IMF loans. Both nuclear powers are now internally unstable, and the border between them is the most militarized on Earth. In the Middle East, oil prices don't go up, they go chaotic. Brent crude hits $200 a barrel, then crashes to $40 when demand disappears because nobody can afford to buy it. Saudi Arabia, whose budget requires $80 oil to break even, faces insolvency. The royal family debates whether to nationalize foreign assets, which would trigger sanctions and isolation. In South America, Brazil, and Argentina, whose economies depend on exporting soybeans and beef to China, watch their currencies implode. Both nations owe hundreds of billions to Chinese banks. They can't pay. The loans default. And China, which spent a decade building the Belt and Road as a debt trap, suddenly owns nothing but worthless IOUs. By day 2, the concept of safe zones is dead. Australia, far from the fighting, sees its economy crater because it exports coal and iron to China. New Zealand, which has no military to speak of, faces food shortages because it imports fuel. Africa, forgotten as always, suffers the worst. The continent depends on wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine. Both export channels are closed. Famine begins in Somalia, Sudan, and the Sahel. The death toll, not from war, but from starvation, climbs into the hundreds of thousands. And the world, distracted by missiles and rhetoric, ignores it, because dead Africans don't move bond markets. They never have. Let's zoom in on one specific victim, Poland, the country that everyone predicts will be the first battleground. And they're right, but not for the reasons you think. Poland's military is modern, well-trained, and highly motivated. It has NATO support, American troops, and Patriot missile batteries. But Poland's economy is fragile. It runs on EU subsidies and foreign direct investment. The zloty is tied to the euro. When the euro collapses, so does Poland. Within 24 hours, Polish banks freeze accounts. The government can't pay salaries. The power grid, which imports electricity from Germany, starts rolling blackouts. And the soldiers who are willing to fight suddenly have families with no food and no heat. Morale doesn't collapse immediately, but the cracks form. And Russia, watching, doesn't invade. It waits. Because why spend blood and treasure on an invasion when economic pressure will do the job for free? Now the endgame. It's day 7. No nuclear weapons have been used. No major cities have been bombed. But the war is already over. The United States has burned through $1 trillion in emergency spending. Its credit rating is junk. The dollar, once the global reserve currency, is worth 70 cents. China has fared no better. Its real estate market, already a bubble, has imploded. Half the country's wealth was tied up in property. It's gone. The banks are insolvent. The Communist Party prints money to stay afloat, but inflation is spiraling. Russia, the supposed aggressor, is on the verge of internal collapse. The oligarchs who kept Putin in power are fleeing to Dubai and Cyprus with whatever assets they can salvage. And Europe, the spectator that got dragged in anyway, is broken. The European Union dissolves as member states prioritize survival over solidarity. Germany, France, and Italy each print their own currency. The borders go back up. It's 1950 all over again. But the cruelest part, the war isn't over. It's just paused because wars don't end with treaties anymore. They end with debt restructuring. The fighting stops, but the ledger remains. And now comes the generational aftermath. The United States, to pay off its war debt, raises taxes to 40%. It slashes Social Security, Medicare, and defense spending. The standard of living drops by 30% overnight. It takes 40 years to recover. China faces mass unemployment and social unrest. The Communist Party survives, but only through brutal repression. The economic miracle is over. Russia fractures. Siberia, rich in resources, declares independence. The ruble is replaced by a new currency backed by oil. But the population has shrunk, the infrastructure is decayed, and the empire is gone. Europe spends 2 decades rebuilding, funded by American loans that come with conditions. Sovereignty is sold off piece by piece. Again. And the lesson? The lesson is this. World War III won't be won by the side with the most missiles. It'll be won by the side that can afford to keep fighting. And if history is any guide, nobody can. Because modern war is too expensive, too interconnected, too fragile. The global economy is a machine built on debt, and war is the wrench that breaks it. So when people ask who gets hit first, the answer is simple. Everyone. Not with bombs. With bankruptcy. The missiles are just for show. The real weapon is the balance sheet. And when the cash runs out, the war ends. Not with a bang. With a foreclosure notice. So here's what you need to understand. The next global conflict won't be decided by soldiers. It'll be decided by accountants. The nation that can manage its debt, stabilize its currency, and maintain its credit will survive. The ones that can't will vanish. It's already happening. The warning signs are everywhere. Sovereign debt at record highs. Trade wars escalating. Alliances fraying. And nobody's talking about it because missiles are more dramatic than spreadsheets. But the ledger doesn't lie. It never has. It never will. And when the music stops, when the credit dries up, when the last bond auction fails, we'll finally learn what historians have been trying to teach us for centuries. Empires don't fall. They go broke. If you want to stay ahead of the people who don't know this, who still think wars are won with courage and firepower, hit subscribe. Because the real battle isn't on the front lines, it's in the vaults. And the vaults are already empty.